All right, let's jump right in. Well, thank you all for joining us and welcome to this series of Research to Runtime with our guest, Boris Cherny. I'm Talia Goldberg. I'm a partner at Bessemer Venture Partners. We are a global venture firm that partners with audacious entrepreneurs at the very earliest days up through every stage of growth. We are so excited to be here today with Boris, the creator of Claude Code from our portfolio company Anthropic. And before I turn it over to Boris just to introduce himself and share a little bit more about Claude Code, I want to share a little bit of the genesis of this series. It started a couple months ago with myself and Bhavik, who I work closely with at Bessemer, seeing just what a dynamic AI landscape it is and how so many different R&D teams across the ecosystem have been accelerating their development by leveraging tools and best practices. This series started as a way for our portfolio companies to share those best practices, to learn from each other, and to showcase how they're using cutting edge technologies. I can't think of anyone better to help us think through this than Boris, talking through how he uses Claude Code and what's happening in the world of agentic coding. For those who don't know, Claude Code has just taken the world by storm. Reports say that it's gone from zero to 400 million plus of revenue in just a few months. But most exciting has been to see the impact it's had across developers and engineering teams, and even beyond that, product developers, designers, and others that have been adopting Claude Code. With no further ado, Boris, would love to let you introduce yourself and maybe share just a little bit about the genesis of Claude Code.
Hey, thanks for having me, Talia. I'm Boris. I'm a creator of Quad Code and a member of technical staff here at Anthropic. Yeah, what was the genesis of Quad Code? It started as a hackathon project like a year ago, and it actually wasn't even meant as a coding product. It wasn't meant even as a product. It was just me trying to figure out how to use the Anthropic public API, which to this day, Quad Code still uses. So it was built as a way for me to get a sense of the API and dog code it a little bit. Still today, Cloud Code only uses the Anthropic public API. We use the same public models that everyone else uses. So I guess dog fooding is successful.
So you didn't join with the intent of necessarily creating Claude Code. And when you joined, what team were you on and how did you decide like, okay, to go, we're going to create Claude Code and we're going to invest a lot of resources behind it?
The team that I joined, it was called the Anthropic Labs team. It was led by Ben Mann, who's one of the co-founders of Anthropic, and Raf, who was like early person at Anthropic, and like still good friends with both of them, and we still work super closely. It was just one of these like innovation teams. I've been on these before when I was at Instagram. I was on this kind of labs team where we tried to spin off new projects and kind of figure out what's next. This kind of innovation team looks really different in an AI lab because there's just an infinite number of things they could build at any time. And there's just this overwhelming feeling that the model is capable of doing all of these things that are just not yet claimed by any product. And it's not just like there's the ability to compete for a particular product. There's all this stuff that literally no product doing. The model is still totally capable of supporting today. Given this overwhelming feeling, they were trying to figure out what to do about it. This kind of innovation team is a natural place to start. It's actually the same team that started MCP and the Quad desktop app. So it all came from that team, different folks on it. I started by building this thing in the terminal, and the idea was just to try to use the public Anthropic API so I could get a sense for it, and I could build on the API a little bit better so I can figure out what projects I actually want to build on that API. And this was just like a way to get a sense of it. At first, it was just this chat app in the terminal. And I remember at some point I gave it access to the Bash tool. And just on a whim, because someone else on the team was also working on Claude Desktop, I asked Claude in the terminal to control my music player. And Claude just immediately wrote some Apple script using the Bash tool and ran it and told me what song I was listening to. And then it was able to start and stop the music player using Apple script. And it was sort of this crazy revelation to me because I'd actually never even used tool use in LLM APIs before. This was a new concept to me at the time. I knew that LLMs can give you completion, so you can send text, they give you text back, they can stream text. And this idea that they can also use tools and interact with the world, this is pretty new to me. And the model was really good at it. It turns out that all the model wants to do is it wants to use the tools, it wants to interact. And so when we gave it even this really basic way to interact with the computer, just Bash, it totally was able to use it and it was able to do all sorts of stuff.
It's very cool. It's like code is the way that the model wants to communicate and interact with the world. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, something like that.
As you think about this innovation team, and to your point, like there's so many products that one could build, the surface area is so large. Are there any examples about how operating at the app layer and the model layer benefit one another and feed into each other?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples. There's a lot of nascent capabilities that we're trying to elicit from the model at any given time. There's all sorts of new stuff that's on the frontier of stuff we can do, but it's not great at yet. These kind of capabilities emerge all the time. So like at some point, tool calling was on this frontier. It was something that, like maybe Claude 3 something, I don't know the exact number. It wasn't very good at. And then at some point it became really amazing at it. And now the 4 series of models, 3.7, 3.6, we're all really, really good at it. Computer use is another capability like this. It just merged with 3.6 and it's just been getting better and better. And I think a lot of the way that it gets better is researchers just trying it. Because as a researcher, you're reading through transcripts a lot of the day and you're in this kind of pretty low level world of you're looking at tokens or you're looking at kind of raw text. But if you can actually experience the model through a product, then you can build pretty different stuff. And that kind of shapes your intuition about what it can and can't do. At Anthropic, I think about 80% of employees or technical employees use Claude Code every day. This includes a lot of researchers. This includes a lot of people on inference and people on all sorts of teams. And you could imagine how this shapes their intuition for the kinds of things the model is good at and bad at with regards to coding, with regards to any kind of agentic work, computer use, things like this. And it shapes their research direction and the kind of problems that they're thinking about.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting because you talk a lot about how the product follows the model, and you have such an interesting lens into where the models are headed and how the product can evolve. I've heard you say and give advice that said, build for where the models will be 6 months from now, not where they are today. So there's this interesting trade-off, it seems like, between creating enough scaffolding for the product to be functional today, but without overfitting to the current capabilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't build for the model of today because in 3 months or 4 months or whatever, then the next model is going to be out and it's going to be completely different. It's going to not just have a different personality and a different vibe, but the capabilities are just going to be totally different. I think this is actually something that we did right with Claude Code, not super intentionally. I guess it was just because we're in exploration mode and we were intentionally trying to push the frontier of the model. But the effect was that we built for the model 6 months out. So when we first started building Claude Code, I think it was 3.5 at the time, and it was okay. Like it could generate pretty good commit messages. It can generate pretty good code, but not great. Like there would be a ton of compilation errors. There'd be a ton of lint errors. It wouldn't be correct a lot of the time. And we just saw it get better with 3.6 and 3.7. And it really clicked when Sonnet 4 and Opus 4 came out. And now we're at Sonnet 4 and Opus 4.1, where it just started to work. Like the model and the scaffolding just worked so well together in a way that didn't feel like it did in previous versions of the product. And I've heard similar things from many customers of Anthropic that they build for this kind of future model, and at some point it just clicks and it starts to work. And you can simulate this. So before the model is ready, you can add a bunch of scaffolding around it, like you said, Talia, to make it work. The scaffolding differs depending on the application, but essentially you're trying to correct for the different model errors. So if the model always makes the same kind of mistake, you might scaffold a little bit to try to maybe adjust the response or handle that particular failure case in the code. And this is something we do a little bit in Claude Code, but it's actually intentionally raw, where if you use the product, you'll see that if the model can't replace a string, for example, the way the model edits files is it uses this tool called string replace. And what this is it's essentially just find and replace in the file. And once in a while, the model makes a mistake, and we show that to you. We want you to experience the model in kind of as raw a form as possible, and we intentionally don't scaffold it and correct for it. Because I think it's really important to get that intuition for what's possible for the model and what's not. And obviously, as a lab, we want you to experience the model. We change the scaffolding with every version. Like I said, when the 4 series of models came out, we ripped out probably half the system prompt, half the tool
Hmm.
prompts. We just deleted it. Cal, who member of the team, and he's on Applied AI here at Anthropic. He just went in and started putting a pull request to just delete the system prompt, and I was like, "Oh my god, what are you doing?" And he was like, no, 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 it's okay, trust me. And he was absolutely right. It's the newer models just didn't need it.
That's amazing. I mean, it's an interesting lesson on what you invest your resources in and what you don't. And I think for teams to even hear that you deleted half the code as the new models came out, that says something in terms of both the rate of progress on the model side, but also how to think about the areas that you do invest your resources and the depreciation on the value of that scaffolding.
Yeah, I think the relationship between engineers and code is changing. And before I would write code, and sometimes the code would be kind of precious. Like I would be afraid to throw it out, and I would keep it around for a long time and be like, I put so much effort into this code. This is the right way to do it. And I would get defensive sometimes about this is the right way to do it. It shouldn't be this other way. And in the world we're in now, there's just no reason to do this anymore. Like we rewrite not just the system prompts, but Claude Code itself all the time. And we rip out tools and we introduce new tools and we change tool shapes multiple times a week, every week. And this is just the way that it is. Like it's so cheap to experiment now. You got to take advantage of it and just try stuff and see what works.
Yeah. Let the model be free, give it agency. I'm seeing a whole bunch of questions in the chat that are related to how you use Claude, but also more broadly, different tools and products in your stack. And so I want to dive in and start to talk a little bit more tactically. You told me when we met up the other week that you use both Claude and Cursor every day. Could you just walk us through, for you personally, like what's your current setup? What do you use? How do you use each? And we'll use that as an intro to a brief demo that you were going to share with us a little bit of examples of power of Claude Code, and then we'll follow up with some topics from the Q&A and best practices with Bhavik from there.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. In my mind, when I think about different kinds of engineering work, there's a very high level. If you look at this like SDLC, like the whole life cycle of building software, there's like planning, then there's coding, then there's debugging, there's maintaining. Generally for planning, I'll use Claude Code and I'll workshop some ideas with it. So if there's a problem that I want to take on, or maybe a data question that will then inform the approach that I take, I'll workshop this with Claude Code and I'll give it access to our BigQuery server. It'll just use the BQ command line tool. You can also use MCP. And it'll query the data and kind of answer any kind of data questions that I have. And then often I'll go back and forth with it and I'll tell it, hey, don't code. And we'll just workshop some ideas for how to build something. So this is kind of the planning step. For coding, I use Claude Code and Cursor together. It kind of depends on the problem that I'm working on. Sometimes I'll use VS Code also. It kind of depends on the problem. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. For debugging, this is Claude Code. So whenever there's any kind of logs coming in, error traces, anything like this, I'll give Claude Code either access to MCP server to use Puppeteer, for example, to see error logs in the browser, or if the error logs are in GCP or something like this, or Datadog, I'll just stream it in either through MCP, or I'll literally just like tail the log and then pipe it into Claude Code because you can use it like a Unix utility. So you can just pipe whatever you want into Claude. It'll see that context. And then for maintenance, we use like Claude Code for a bunch of stuff, like just routine tasks and deleting dead code and deleting experiments and like, things like this. So to drill into coding a little bit, there's probably my mental model is there's probably three categories of tasks. And this is my mental model. I don't know if everyone thinks about these same kind of categories, but it's easy tasks, medium tasks, and hard tasks. For really easy tasks, these are usually one-shotable. So you give it one prompt and then the model can just figure it out and it can do it for you. And for this kind of task, I'll actually usually just do it directly in GitHub. If you have Claude Code installed, you can run / install GitHub app, and this will install @Claude on GitHub in whatever repo you want. And so on pull requests, on issues, I'll just tag @Claude, and it'll do work for me. So it can put up pull requests, it can answer questions, whatever. Usually what I'll do is I'll make a GitHub issue, and then I'll tag @Claude, can you do this for me? And it'll just put up a pull request for me. For medium tasks, it takes a little bit more back and forth, where you can try to one-shot it. Sometimes you have to steer the model, so it's not going to get it right the first time. Sometimes it'll go off on the wrong track. Sometimes it'll do a thing, and then you won't like that thing, and you'll ask it to change it. And this I'll usually do in the terminal. I often have a few Claude codes running, maybe a couple in one repo, one in another repo. And I'll just take one of these quads, and I'll give it the prompt. And sometimes I'll enter plan mode, and then sometimes I won't. It kind of depends on the border of like, how hard is this task? If I think it can one-shot it, I'll just ask it to try. And then if it goes on the wrong track, I'll just be watching it. And if it's on the wrong track, I'll hit escape to stop it, and then I'll correct it so it can do something else. If the task is a little bit harder, I'll start in plan mode. I'll workshop a plan together, and then I'll ask it to execute. And typically for this kind of medium tasks, I would say that without planning, maybe it succeeds 20, 30% of the time without a lot of intervention. But with planning, that goes up to maybe 70 or 80% of the time. And this is actually a really great example of scaffolding, because planning is just a scaffold. When you enter plan mode, we just send a little message to the assistant to tell it, hey, you're in plan mode, don't code. That's it. And this little bit of scaffolding helps a lot. It tells the assistant, and you actually don't even have to use plan mode. You can just tell it this, and it'll listen the same way. And then the last category is hard tasks. And these are tasks where I usually start it in Claude Code, and I'll break it down a little bit. I'll make a plan and write it to a markdown file before I have Claude go at it and implement it. I'll sometimes have to open an IDE at the end. So this is either Cursor or VS Code or whatever your IDE of choice is. And I'll then manually edit the code. And there's still probably some things that I prefer to write by hand, just because as an engineer, we're here to code. Sometimes you just want to go a level and mess with the code itself. For example, the core agent loop for Claude Code, I still mostly write it by hand. There's an engineer on the team, Lena. I remember she's like a C++ background, kind of like robotics and stuff. And she's saying that on the weekends, she still sometimes writes C++ by hand, turns off the autocomplete, not even in Claude Code, just in IDE without autocomplete. Just because as an engineer, this is the thing that we love. And there's different ways to code nowadays, but sometimes you just want to scratch that itch. And then I think the last thing I'd say is this frontier for what is easy, what is medium, what is hard. So like the exact model, the exact bucket definitions, this changes with every model. With a 4 series of models, these are the definitions today. With 3.6, pretty much everything was hard. And you would still have to steer the model a lot. It could one-shot really, really simple stuff, but mostly couldn't. And you would have to be in the loop and pretty involved. And then with 3.5, like everything was really hard. And it wouldn't get most things on the first shot, maybe like 10%. And so I would say nowadays, probably like 50% of my work, I just one shot, maybe 40, 50%. And then the second half, the other 50%, I'll be involved to some extent.
Wow, that's an awesome overview. Thank you for going through that. It's amazing to hear how specifically you think about what way to use Claude and how to use Claude. As I listen to you, it seems like software engineering, there's these two major work streams. It's the prompting of the agentic tools and the planning, and then later the reviewing or the editing. So there's these two kind of major activities, and it's figuring out which ones to do when and how to interplay between the two. We have so many follow-ups and specific questions. There's some coming through the Q&A that are great, and others that Bhavik and I have been slacking back and forth as you've been talking that this has inspired. So would love to see the demo, and then we'll pepper you with some of these questions on how you're using Claude internally and just some best practices for eng teams that are getting up to speed.
Yeah, let's do it. So we'll just do a really simple one in the interest of time. So share my screen. Can you see this okay?
Yes.
I was looking through our issue tracker. By the way, the issue tracker is like getting insane. We tried so hard to keep up with these issues, and they're piling up faster than we can fix them. So now we actually have Claude Code. We're using the Claude Code SDK, and it's going in and just automatically deduping issues and closing out duplicates. Soon it's also going to start auto-resolving issues using the docs for kind of like Q&A issues that are already documented. We're definitely trying to use automation to help with this, and it's working pretty well. But here's one that this seems like a legitimate bug. So this is a bug in Claude Code that the tilde doesn't expand when using the glob tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like copy this URL, and then in my terminal, I'm going to start up Claude, and I'm just going to tell it fix this. And I'm going to shift tab to enter plan mode to start, because I don't actually know what the issue is in this case. And so it's asking for permission. I don't know what the issue is in this case. And so I just want some kind of overview from Claude. What is the issue? How are you actually going to fix it before we proceed? And let me make this a little bigger also so you can see it. And for stuff where I would already know what the issue is, then I'll just let Claude go at it. In this case, it's not totally obvious to me. So I just want some kind of confirmation first. Cool. And you can see, I imagine most people on this call have already used Claude Code a bunch, but you can kind of see if you haven't used an agentic coding tool before, I gave it this really simple prompt and Claude is going at it. So kind of the same way that an engineer would search for, if this is an issue related to glob, and as an engineer, I would probably also start by searching for glob or search for glob tool. And here it's finding this glob tool definition that we have. And this is the Claude code base itself. It's pretty cool. There's actually there's nothing in the system prompt telling it when given a GitHub issue, you should glob around and search more. This is just Claude kind of figuring it out given the tools that it has. And so here's the diagnosis. So it doesn't expand the tilde. We need to add the tilde expansion. It's found the existing utility to do this. This sounds right to me. And then it's asking if this is right, and I'll say yes.
Wow.
And so in this case, it already knew what to do. So maybe I didn't really need plan mode, but I did it just in case because, sometimes it wouldn't propose the right thing and I would have to work with it to course correct it a little bit. And so here I just said, yeah, continue. It made a to-do list for itself about what to do. This is making the fix, running type check, and then running the test.
By the way, and are you using Sonnet 4 right now?
Yeah, I think it's either Sonnet 4 or Opus 4. Usually I use actually Sonnet 4 just because the quality is pretty much the same as Opus, but the speed is a lot better. Cool, and it's saying there's something in our TypeScript build where it's trying to build dependencies or something. And so in this case, Claude kind of realized that, and now it's working around it. So this command would kind of error, but here it's redirecting it to dev null so that it can make sure everything builds.
And Boris, how did Claude Code get up to speed on the repository so quickly?
Yeah, so in this case, we have a QuadMD that tells Claude Code a little bit about the repo, but there's nothing there about where the tools live or anything. So this is it just intuiting it. So it just kind of figured out this is the thing I would search for, and then it just got the structure that way.
And is that CloudMD file, is that universal across the entire repository, or is it federated in different directories? How have you structured it, or how do you recommend structuring it?
Yeah, it depends on the size of your repo. For the Claude Code repo, it's pretty small. So we have a single QuadMD file. And for bigger repos, we usually have a few. So for example, for the Anthropic Mono repo, there's a bunch. Any customer that has more than maybe 10,000 files or so, then you probably want a few QuadMDs, one in the root and then maybe one in nested directories and so on. Actually, so here I'm saying that Claude on the wrong track. And in this case, what happened is it's trying to test it manually, and I actually don't want it to test it manually. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to drop down to bash mode. So I'm just hitting exclamation mark, and this lets me run bash commands directly within Claude Code, and in a way that Claude Code can actually see the context. And I'm just going to do a git status, and then I'm going to hit Control R, and this lets me see the full output. So that looks good, and then I'm going to do a git diff also. I'm going to do another Control R. This lets me see the full output. And so this actually looks good. So I'm going to say, actually, don't test manually. I'm going to test to write a unit test. And I'm going to get out of auto accept mode and just switch to default mode here. Yeah, and so to your question about what level of detail to put in the QuadMD, generally I would just put stuff that you see Claude struggling with continuously. Most times that you run Claude Code, it struggles with the same kind of thing. Maybe it'll use the wrong test runner, or it'll look in the wrong directory for stuff, or it won't run the right verification commands or whatever. Then in that case, I would add it to QuadMD, but I wouldn't try to kind of pre-add a bunch of stuff if you don't actually see Claude struggling with it. Cool. All right, so this looks pretty good. This looks right to me. And we're just going to run the test in CI. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this commit push PR slash command that I have. And what this does, this is just a slash command that I made. So this is a slash command that I made. And all this does is it makes a git commit, it pushes it, and it makes a pull request. And it's actually really simple. So maybe while this runs, I can kind of show you what that looks like. And so user-defined slash commands, you just put them in the .quad/commands folder. And these are just regular markdown files. And here's the entirety of my commit push PR command. So all this is a markdown file, and it just sends this prompt to Claude. So all it does is, here's the current status, here's the diff, here's the branch, and then here's what I want you to do. And there's a couple power user features in here that I use. So one is I pre-allow a few tools because I know if I want to make a commit, I want to push, I want to make a PR, Claude's going to have to run git add, it's going to have to run git push. And I don't want it to ask me for permission every time because I know that if I ran /commit push PR, then Claude's going to want to use this. So I pre-allow this so it doesn't ask me for permission. The second thing is I have this little macro here. So this is exclamation mark tilde. And what this does is it pre-evaluates this bash before it sends it to Claude. And this just avoids the back and forth. So essentially, like in one shot, in this case, Claude has all the context that it needs to do this, and it doesn't have to go back and forth with me. Just because I run this command like 5-10 times a day. So I want it to be really fast. Okay, I think we're done. This is it here. Yeah, and this looks pretty good. So I'm going to wait for the test to run, and then otherwise I think this is done.
That's cool. And so you would describe that as one of the easier tasks as opposed to the medium and hard?
Yeah, I would say this is like a lower medium, I'd say. It was sort of on the border of did I need to use plan mode or not? It was medium because I think there's actually a variety of ways to fix it. Claude happened right now to do it the correct way, but it could have actually done it a different way that wouldn't have been correct. And also you have to add tests. So you saw that I had to course correct it one time to tell it, no, you're on the wrong track. Don't try to test it manually. Actually, I just want you to write a unit test.
So it seems like we used slash commands, we used the high-level planning features, we also used the code execution features, but there's so much to Claude Code that we didn't get to use, the MCPs, the subagents. What else do you find yourself routinely using in the day-to-day flow?
I think this is a place where Claude Code is meant to be super hackable. What this means is that every engineer has a different workflow. The reason for this is a dev tool, and dev tools have to be really, really hackable because engineers have so many different workflows, so many different stacks, so many different kinds of code bases. There's just no one size fits all at all. So we really don't want to force a particular way of developing, particular philosophy. The idea is you should be able to use Claude Code the way that you want to use it. For me, I'm sort of like vanilla user. I use like just pretty basic features, honestly. So I have a Claude MD. I use slash commands a lot. Sometimes I'll use custom agents. For example, there's a code simplification agent that Sid on the team made and added to the code base. This is a thing that I'll use for any kind of more complex code. I'll run the code simplification agent to just simplify the code because Claude being Claude, it over-engineers sometimes. And this is something that improves with every model, but this is another area where you can kind of scaffold to get this capability before the next model just innately has this capability.
To that point around complex commits, how does your team at Anthropic maintain commit discipline? Is the focus now shifting towards code review as opposed to code generation?
Yeah, when I first started Claude Code, everyone would complain because I put up these giant PRs of like thousands of lines and all this stuff mixed together, and I would just like go straight to main. It was just like me working on it. But then as soon as this got to any kind of scale, this is like way before we released it externally, but like at any kind of scale internally, we had to make it so we use branches, we had to use pull requests. As more people join the team, you need that kind of discipline. So you definitely still need this. I think nowadays we enforce pretty good discipline. So the code base has a lot of really good static analysis, and then like type checks and lint and things like this. All of the pull requests are very focused because it's actually Claude writing, I think, almost 100% of the pull requests, like the messages and making the commits and so on. And what that means is that Claude is able to divide up change sets. So even if I worked on a few things at once, Claude can divide it into a few logical commits and pull requests for me. I don't have to do that myself. And then as far as code review, Claude actually does most of our code review now. So I think probably 80, maybe 90% of the work is just Claude. So we have we use the Claude Code SDK, and we have the /code review / command, and we'll release this at some point that we use. And this is just a few instructions. It's actually very short. It's just telling Claude, look at the code, compare it to the Claude MD, look for obvious bugs, things like that. And it's quite good at it. So most of the time it'll spot bugs before engineers do.
That's cool. Has Claude ever committed a bug that that it wasn't able to catch that your team ended up catching?
I think this kind of thing happens pretty often, and the same way that it does for a human too. I think now that the Claude does the code reviews also, this is actually happening. This hasn't really happened too much. Yeah. But the way that I see software is like there's no software that has no bugs unless you're working on like NASA satellites or something. So the thing that you need is you have like a budget for bugs. You just want to make it so the software feels pretty good. It generally should feel reliable, should feel fast, and you want bugs to stay under some percent.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I know you talked a little bit about Claude MD files and collaboration. That's something we've noticed, to your point, is Claude workflows tend to be really bespoke and specific to an engineer or a team or a code base. And when teams are just starting to get onboarded onto Claude or start using it, people are trying to figure out the best practices or best ways to share what they've discovered in terms of hacks or workflows with the rest of the community. Have you guys found any effective mechanism for that outside of sort of the Claude MD files and sort of shared knowledge or memory
Yeah.
for sharing workflows with between engineers or users?
Yeah, definitely. So sharing within a team, there's a bunch of different options. The best thing is actually check it into the code base. And every way that Claude Code can be configured, you can actually check that configuration directly into the code base. So for example, if you have like a Claude MD, you just check that into Git, just put it in the root of your repo or whatever folder it's relevant to and just keep it there. If you have settings or hooks, you can check this in. If you have custom slash commands, custom agents, we just launched output modes. If you have custom output modes, you just check this into your code base. And that's it. And then anytime someone runs Claude in that code base, they get it automatically. I think a mistake that I see people make sometimes is they have a setting and they only use it for themselves. So it kind of stays in your home directory and kind of the configuration on your laptop. But actually, when in doubt, always check it in. And you kind of see this in the product too. So for example, you can hit the pound sign for Claude to remember something. So anytime you want Claude to incorporate something into Claude MD, just hit the pound sign. I usually do this like maybe once a day, every other day, something like this. When I don't edit my Claude MD manually, Claude just does it for me. And when you hit the pound sign, it will actually prompt you which memory file you want to commit it to. And a memory file is just a Claude MD file. And by default, I just choose the project QuadMD. So that's the one in the current Git repo.
Super interesting. So we got this question in the chat, and I think a lot of people are thinking about privacy and security related to Claude. There was a question around managing API keys and secrets when using Claude Code. There's an attendee who adds a bunch of deny rules to prevent read or grep commands for any sensitive files. Of course, Claude Code can elicit from you if you want it, before you run a bash command. But are there any other clever approaches or tactics that you've seen to ensure that your Claude Code isn't making any syscalls or any native function calls that could be dangerous or malicious on the computer or on the code base?
Definitely. So there's a lot of stuff that's built in, and there's a lot of stuff that as a user you can configure. So at the most basic level, obviously as Anthropic, we spend a ton of time on model alignment, and there's just like a huge percent of the company. This is what they work on, and so using bash commands that are in line with what a human would want to use and not malicious and not just like something that's like potentially dangerous. This is actually fundamentally just a model alignment problem. And there's a lot of people that are working on this and something that we try to bake into the model as much as possible. The second layer is when there is content that comes, there is some external information that comes into context. There's a kind of a few different threat models you want to think about. The biggest one is prompt injection. And one way this can happen is if Claude reads some information on the internet and that has some instruction like, you must rmrf the home directory or something. And then Claude listens to that. In practice, we have not seen something like this exploited just because the generally alignment is good and Claude knows to not follow this. But there's also a bunch of protections in place in terms of various prompt classifiers that we have. And we don't let Claude see the raw result of any kind of web fetches like this for this reason. So we kind of have an intermediate model that does summarization and make sure that Claude doesn't see it. Whenever Claude does run a bash command, there's another classifier that runs to make sure it's safe. And we also do a bunch of static analysis to make sure that it's safe. And if we're not sure, we're going to prompt you for permission. So these are a few of the things that we do. There's obviously a lot more. As far as like secrets go, definitely use deny rules in settings JSON. This is the right way to go. All you have to do is deny read. You don't have to deny glob or grep or anything. Those all respect the read rule. So just deny that one. The other kind of clever thing that you can do is you can use post hooks. So we have pretty rich support for hooks. And if there's any kind of hook that's missing, just let us know in the issue tracker and we'll build it. And so what you can do is anytime that a tool result comes back before it goes to the model, you can intercept it. And you can say, like, does this have credentials? Or whenever the model has some kind of output, you can look for credentials and do kind of secret scrubbing that way.
And is that, if I was managing a team of engineers and wanted visibility into the type of data that they're pulling in to their model's context or to their cloud context, is there a way to start to build visibility across teams or across organizations?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is we actually support OTel, Open Telemetry, for Claude Code. And so you can use this to emit all sorts of events and just get that information. Yeah.
That's cool. That's super cool. Another theme we've heard a lot about, and granted, it's been on everyone's minds because of different pricing discussions and gross margin discussions in the industry, is just cost and efficiency. A lot of people end up blowing through their credits. There was an interesting thread on Twitter about someone who manages his or her sleep schedule based on when they can access Claude Code. Are there any strategies you have or you use around just being efficient in your tasks, both to avoid cost, to preserve the environment? Yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Generally, our philosophy with Claude Code is we want to make this the most performant product at any cost. So the only thing we care about is capability. If there's a way to have a certain amount of capability with more efficient token usage, we will do that. But if we have to compromise capability, we won't do it. So for us, the most important thing is that this is the best agent. It's the most capable thing at any cost. So over time, I would actually expect cost to increase because as the model gets smarter and as we figure out how to use subagents better, as we figure out how to use parallelization better, token usage will go up, and this has a cost. We think about how to reduce token usage without hurting capability, and we've kind of landed a bunch of stuff internally to do this. And there's a lot of stuff around like truncating bash outputs and things like this that we do to kind of reduce token usage. We also recently launched Opus for planning mode. And this is kind of based on the observation that for planning, Opus tends to be better than Sonnet. But actually for coding, once the plan is there, you can just use Sonnet and we don't really see a difference in performance. If this changes at any point, we're going to stop recommending that. But at this point, Opus for plan, Sonnet for coding works super well. And so we definitely recommend that.
When Bhavik and I were playing around before this, I think it was like $3 of cost we had in something like 15 minutes. And on the one hand, you could say that that's high. On the other hand, like I think it's actually remarkably low still. If you think about the work that it's doing and the cost of engineering and software time. And so it kind of all comes back to this software budget versus labor budget question that I think the industry is shifting towards.
Yeah, this is something I wonder a lot about is like, what's the right comp for this? Like one way to think about the cost is the comp is, like a $20 or $40 Copilot subscription, and that's kind of the benchmark. The other way is kind of engineer salary is the benchmark. I actually think it's neither of these because we're at the point where Claude Code can do the work of like many engineers when you kind of multi-Claude. So it's actually not even about like one engineer's time. And it's sort of hard to put a number on this because it's just such a big multiplier. I think in the past when people used various coding assistants, you saw it, it was maybe like a 30% improvement on productivity or 20% improvement or something like this. And back when I worked in big tech, this is something that we looked at a lot and we ran a lot of internal studies to try to put a specific number on it. And I think now with Quad Code, the multiple is already, like it's several times an engineer productivity. It's no longer 30%.
Yeah.
And this number is just going to keep going up. So, when we're at the point where Claude Code can make one engineer able to do the work of 10 engineers. And so, your only bottleneck is ideas. And so all the engineers on your team are just like incredibly productive and can just crank out code super fast and just make stuff happen super fast. Like, what is the value of that? I'm not sure, but this is something that we're thinking about.
Yeah, I think to me, like the sub agents really hit home with that of just almost having this team, right? That you can spin up and have a team working for you overnight. And so that certainly rings true. As you,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna maybe talk about like how we came up with subagents. Would that be
Yeah,
interesting?
that
That'd
would
be
be
fascinating.
interesting. And maybe just for
Um,
those who aren't maybe as familiar, maybe just describe what sub agents are and how you're using them.
yeah, totally. So subagents are kind of like sub quads that Claude can invoke. And so we have the main thread and Ellie, who's an engineer at Anthropic, she called this Mama Claude. And so now we've kind of taken to calling like the main Claude process Mama Claude. And Mama Claude can spawn baby Claudes, so these kind of like sub Claudes. And all this is like it's Claude calling Claude. It's a little mind bendy, but the idea is like Claude itself is a tool that Claude can use. And so what this means is that if there's some kind of subtask that Mama Claude wants to delegate to, Claude can spawn a little Claude to do that task. So for example, something like code review or code simplification or planning, these are things that you might not necessarily want to do in the main thread. But if you spawn a sub agent, so like a sub instance of Claude to do this work, it's a little bit more focused because the context window is more focused. Maybe the tools are more focused. And so it'll do this work and then it'll report back to the main thread. So this is subagents, and the place that it came from is we actually saw a thread on the Claude subreddit where someone was, I think, using like MCP servers or something to have this big army of subagents, and they had like a product manager subagent and designer subagent. They had like a front end engineer, back end engineer, and we just thought this was so cool. And Sid, who's an engineer on the team, spent his hackathon time doing this. We had this hackathon maybe a month or two ago at Anthropic, and he built this with a few folks, and it just took off like wildfire internally. And so we released it as fast as we could just to let people use it. And I think this is generally our product philosophy is we want to build a product that's super easy to hack so people can use it in the way that they want. And then we want to see how people customize it. We want to see how power users use it, how normal users like myself use it. And then based on that, that'll tell us what features to build next. And kind of in product, like this isn't even AI, just in regular product development, we call this idea latent demand, that you want to see how people hack the product and what there is this demand for. And then you use that to figure out what to build next. I think in architecture, there's also this notion of like desire paths. So like when people are walking across the lawn, instead of using the crosswalk at right angles, you see where they're walking and then you make a path there. But the first thing you want to see is you want to see where exactly they cut across the lawn. So you put the rocks or whatever in the right place. This is definitely our approach to the building product too.
As you think about new product features, are there any predictions you have around how the next generation of models might impact the things you can do that you can't do now with Claude Code, or some of the features that Claude Code has now that might have to be deprecated because they're in the path of the foundation models?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think subagents are actually a thing that we might deprecate at some point.
Yeah.
It's something that's like useful now, but as the model gets really good at managing its own context, you won't need these specialized agents anymore. So they're very much scaffolding for models of today. One could imagine a model that's perfectly aligned. And if it is, then you might not need all the security features. This is something we need for models of today because we don't trust them. At some point, there's going to be a model that's really well aligned, and maybe you won't need this anymore. Yeah, this is something that we're thinking about all the time. And just to think about like if you're building products on top of Anthropic API or you're building a product on a model, you want to see the places where the model struggles today. And if it feels like this kind of thing where for a lot of use cases it struggles at this, then you could imagine that this is something that will be improved in the next version of the model, just because it'll come up a lot. And so for Claude Code, this is, for example, performance on really long trajectories. This is being really, really good at tool use. Things like this. You could imagine all of these getting better.
That makes sense.
We had a couple questions come up in the chat about how Claude Code is being used even outside of coding. And you mentioned before that Claude was being used internally for other team members that were even on the design team or non-engineering team. Can you share a little bit of the use cases that are non-technical use cases and some of the most interesting things that you've heard and surprising things that you've heard Claude being used for?
Yeah, honestly, it's still crazy to me that even engineers use this thing in the terminal. Like, I think there's a lot of engineers I know that don't even want to touch a terminal, and yet they're learning to use it so they can use Claude Code, and this is amazing.
By the way, it's
Um,
product market fit that you have folks that didn't even know what a terminal was probably before though using Claude Code. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rebirth of the terminal. And this is extra true for all the people that aren't engineers because terminals are scary. They're intimidating. Like they can mess up your system settings if you don't do the right thing. Luckily, if you stay within Quad Code, it'll kind of protect you and it'll keep you on the right track and it'll ask you for permission and stuff. But yeah, the terminal is like pretty low level. There's a lot of different use cases actually beyond engineering. This has been one of the big surprises to me, both in and out of Anthropic. There's a ton of people that use it for non-engineering use cases. Some examples are designers use it to do prototypes. And so both of our designers, Megan and Nate, they both use Quad Code to prototype. And what they'll do is they have some Figma design, they'll feed it into Quad Code, either with a screenshot or through the MCP, the Figma MCP integration. And then they'll just have Quad Code make a first pass at it. And usually after a couple iterations, it's pretty much the same code that an engineer would write. And so they've been actually very actively lending code in our code base. This is awesome. Our data scientists use Quad Code for any kind of data analysis. And this actually blew me away. I remember walking into the office one day and there's a few data scientists that sit right next to us, right next to the Quad Code team. And I remember walking in and like they were all just like using Quad Code with BigQuery. And this is crazy because I didn't expect this. I didn't teach them to use it. They figured out how to install it. They figured out how to put it in their terminal. And it was just writing a bunch of BigQuery queries for them. And now they swear by it. So I think pretty much the whole data science team at Anthropic uses this all the time. Our product manager, Kat, uses Quad Code all the time also, both to land features, but also to do like market research, for example. So we were thinking about like, what are the sectors that we'd get the most value out of Quad Code? And I don't know, like a question like that. And Quad Code is able to use the internet. So it can do web fetch, it can do web search. And I think she just said like think about this problem, break it down, launch like 20 agents to do research, and then come back to me with a summary. And Claude Code just did that. And then, 30 minutes later, she had the answer in a nice table. Maybe it even generated a PDF or something for her.
that's super cool. Well, it seems like over time, just the interface where you access Cloud Code a bit or will change or could change. Now the terminal, I guess you also have extensions or you can add Claude in GitHub and the like. But as the role of engineering and creating products evolves and the surface area of what you can do and the model can do changes, I'll be curious if we move a little bit further away over time from the terminal or versus staying in it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty likely. We also have the Quad Code SDK. This is the same SDK that Quad Code uses internally, and we offer it for people that want to use it. So there's many, many thousands of companies that have built on top of it. Some of these use cases are related to coding, and then some of them have used it as a generic agent SDK and just found that it works really well as a generic agent that's for applications that are not related to coding at all. So just because it's a good coding agent, it actually means it's a good agent generally. And because you can override and customize the system prompt and the tools super easily, you can use it for all sorts of stuff that doesn't need bash and doesn't need coding and stuff. And I think this is one of the things I'm really excited for. I think as a company, we're going to build some of the future applications of Quad Code and of coding agents. But I think actually the vast majority of these applications will be built outside of the company. It's going to be built on our APIs and on our SDKs. And there's just so much waiting to be built. There's no way one company can build all of this. So yeah, for Anthropic, we have this kind of dual role in the ecosystem. One is building awesome products, but also the second one is building awesome tools. And we want to give the world the same exact tools that we use internally. Quad Code is an example, Quad Code SDK is an example, Anthropic API is an example, because there's all these things that people can build that we just wouldn't even know about. And there's just no way one company can do it.
Yeah. It's very interesting. No need to answer this, but over time, I'll wonder if there will be other examples of product surface areas outside of coding and perhaps enterprise search where you'll start to see some of that application and model layer capabilities and focus. So you could imagine even something like health, Like, could there be basic products that you use in health use cases or otherwise? And where does that start and stop? But we'll save that for another conversation. This has been so amazing, Boris. The chat has been on fire. You've given so many practical and tactical tips that I'm confident will supercharge folks' development. We'll be sure to post this recording online. So for those that asked about sharing it with their teams, we'll follow up over the next couple of days with a link to be able to do that. I'll leave with one parting question. It's very clear that the role of an engineer has changed and is going to keep changing and evolving. As you think about what you hire for and what you look for, how do you think about that? What are you looking for as you grow the team at Anthropic and as you think about how rapidly this field is changing and progressing?
Yeah, the kind of skills that we hire for nowadays are really different than the kind of skills that we would hire for in the past. I think now the most important thing is being intellectually curious and honest and being able to think about things from first principle and being okay when you're wrong. It's being technically very strong and not just on a single stack, but across like a bunch of stacks. So, just like able to hack and able to build stuff. And like I use Claude Code to write a bunch of languages that I don't know at all. But still, as an engineer, you have to understand systems and you have to understand code. And ultimately, it's an engineer that has to review all this stuff. I think maybe the kind of people we're hiring for is actually like more like scientists or maybe like coders or hackers. It's less kind of these kind of engineers that were successful in big company environments in the past.
Listening to you sounds like a little bit revenge of the generalist, revival of the generalist mindset, which is cool to see. With that, Anthropic is hiring. They're growing really fast. Claude Code is growing really fast. If you want to work on Claude Code, check out their website and all the jobs that they're looking for and hiring for. Thank you so much, Boris, for sharing your time with us and taking your weekend to help accelerate the community's use of Claude Code.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Boris.
Thanks so much, both.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Cheers.